This episode discusses mental health treatment. Consult with your doctor before beginning or modifying any existing treatment of mental health issues.
What are you listening to? Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. I'm Kim.
And I'm Carolyn.
Okay, we're going to be talking about some of the headlines that, or behind some of the headlines. So we have an absolute tragedy this week where our Lieutenant Governor Henderson had a close family member who was killed in an act of domestic violence.
Yeah.
We had our governor also come out with concern about our youth suicide rate, which has been kind of a prevalent thing that we've talked about from the policy perspective for a couple years. Mm-hmm. And we also, Utah just celebrated that we were the initiator of the new hotline for mental health crisis and suicide that really originated in our state with Senator Daniel Thatcher, Representative Steve Eliason. And so on the policy perspective, there is a lot of more emphasis maybe than ever. We've got school boards are looking at how they can bring more mental health support into schools, which I really don't love that mission creep, but there is a lot of active...
Again, if they were teaching reading and writing adequately, maybe I would trust mental health to
right.
them.
But before you mission creep into other places. So we have with us tonight, we have Jacob Hess to talk about sort of the backside of these things and some of the underlying things. Jacob has served on the board of the National Coalition of Dialogue and Deliberation and has worked to promote liberal conservative understanding since his book with Phil Neisser, You're Not As Crazy As I Thought, But You're Still Wrong, which sounds like something I say every day to a lot of people. And sometimes I just say, no, you really are as crazy as I thought, and you're still wrong. His most recent book with Carrie Scarda, Kyle Anderson, and Ty Mansfield is The Power of Stillness, Mindful Living for Latter-day Saints. So I came across some of Jacob's writings in the Deseret News, Public Square magazine, which is a fun magazine, very thoughtful academic perspective on a lot of things, public policy and culture. And so we want to bring Jacob on to talk about sort of what is the state of concern for mental health in Utah and where your work intersects.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. I apologize for my little boy room background. You have such a nice display there. The only quiet room in my home tonight.
You go where you have to. Yeah.
I mean, we've been in an epidemic for so many years. It's sort of like COVID. We just start to take for granted that mental health epidemics are just normal. But they're not. Like, rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide have reached historic levels. And so I think a starting point is presuming goodwill among all the different stakeholders. We see right now in our conversation about child sexual abuse a distinct lack of that. And something I've been thinking a lot about is that needs to be a starting point for all these issues: mental health, pandemic, abuse. If we can't presume that our ideological opponents actually care about stopping these things, if we're convinced they're part of some shadow conspiracy to overthrow democracy, make everybody sick, keep children in abusive homes, then I don't have much hope. So I think I like to start there because I'm starting to realize a lot of Americans don't take that for granted anymore.
Right.
And that book that I wrote was with an atheist Marxist professor, like the opposite of me. And I adore him. And he drives me nuts. Like, sometimes, right? So that's the kind of spirit of the work I've done, is we got to preserve that space. It's the same space that we see in a healthy marriage, in a healthy faith community, healthy neighbors. We don't have to think the same. but let's try to work together on this.
Yeah.
So my work was started by watching my own loved ones suffering with mental health problem year after year after year. And they would get help. We have a lot of systems in place to get help, which is good. But that help seemed to only stabilize and help these loved ones cope and manage for a while, and then they would fall back, right? And so the question that I really grappled with in my graduate studies was, what does it take to really reach deeper, more lasting healing, especially for depression? And I've been inspired by a woman named Kelly Turner. So I've lost 2 family members to cancer, like another epidemic, right, that we're just used to. And Kelly said, instead of just focusing on the people dying, what would happen if we paid attention to those who actually got better? So she has focused all this attention on, what do people who actually get better from cancer do? And it is fascinating, right? There's like many, many patterns, but people who get better do 10 things, all of them. Like there's 10 things that are patterns across people who heal. That's what I've been doing with depression and anxiety. I've been gathering stories, people who actually are well. They're not just coping and managing. And they were the people that were like barely holding on and deeply, deeply, suicidal and in pain. And I've been learning so much and just gathering these stories and listening to them. So I'll stop there.
Well, I have a question then. So what have you found in all of your research? What would you put at the top, maybe as the top 2 or 3 things that people who are doing well, coming out of, deep depression or difficult mental health trials, what are they doing consistently?
Well, that's been the golden question for me. And as backdrop to what I'm about to say, there is no the cause of mental health problems. There's not a smoking gun. This is it. That was always the problem with the chemical imbalance theory. It's like people would just say, well, I just have a chemical imbalance. And then they would stop thinking about all these other things. So before I did this study that I'll tell you about, we spent time reviewing the risk factor literature. And that's all the different studies on what sets people up for depression, anxiety. And what that literature finds is the same thing as this other study. So essentially, all of life, like there are hundreds of things that can set us up for depression or anxiety. It's remarkable how wide and diverse. It's like living closer to a freeway when the particulate pollution in the air. Living in Utah, close to some of the Bingham copper mine stuff. There's more heavy metal in the air. Difficult experiences growing up, chronic stress.
Gestation things.
Oh, yes, for sure. And the kinds of things we eat or don't eat, the kinds of stressors we have in our lives, how much fresh air we're getting, how much we move around. There's one study that shows for every half an hour you go to bed earlier, you reduce your risk of depression in a measurable way, right?
So putting a pin right there, there was an incredible study, this probably about 10 years ago, I got my hands on it, on children in particular, and the amounts of sleep that they got. And they looked specifically at the children who were deprived by half an hour and then an hour. And what was so insidious about this was the children who lost as little as a half hour of sleep retained only negative memory and memories of negative experiences. And so we're literally, when we let our kids stay up late playing on video games or whatever, watching TV or just staying up late and not getting enough sleep, that we're setting them up to program their brains, their memories to dwell and live in negative and live in trauma and live in those things. And so I paid a lot of attention to that as a parent. But so
I'm feeling guilty as a mother right now.
oh no, send your kids to bed. So if you love your kids, send them to bed, and don't let them, do what they do at night. So Jacob,
he was
yes, go ahead.
By the way, let me just interject. All this that we're talking about is good news.
Yes.
Because it can start to feel overwhelming, like everything causes cancer and everything causes depression. But it's not that. What it actually means is if there are a lot of things influencing this, that means there's a lot we can consider doing about it. Mm-hmm. So the study that I mentioned, these people that are getting better, they make adjustments in their life gradually. They don't change everything. Like it's not like you have to throw everything out, but you just start to move things in the right direction. And maybe I'm going to work in this area. And that gives me, I interviewed a guy just yesterday who was deeply depressed for years. And then he heard a story of someone who had done an elimination diet and started to test different foods. He found that if he stopped eating beans, for heaven's sakes, beans, all of a sudden his mood lifted. And when he ate beans again, anything in the bean family, it just tanked. So this was just one kind of clue. It's like Sherlock Holmes. You just kind of look at your life. And then that gave him more energy to try other things. Yeah. And it becomes an upward spiral, the opposite of a vicious cycle, right? You start to move towards deeper healing.
Wow. And you alluded to this briefly, but would you give us a rundown just briefly of what we discovered recently about SSRIs? SSRIs. Yes. And sorry. And the medications that have been used to treat depression for decades that may not have the impact that we in the medical community had hoped or thought they might.
Yeah, so for many years, there was a belief among even scientists that maybe there's a deficiency in serotonin in your brain that correlates with depression, kind of like diabetes and insulin. And that was a legitimate theory until lots of studies were done and it just wasn't being confirmed. So it's been about 20 years since neuroscientists moved on. And what happens is it takes a while for the public to catch up. So there is no enduring chemical imbalance behind depression. There are many different neurochemicals in the brain that definitely play a role, but a lot of the serotonin in our brain comes from what we eat, right? So if you eat a handful of raw cashews, you're going to have an infusion of serotonin. Hold on.
Oh.
So
good to know.
Yeah, really.
But this doesn't mean, by the way, that antidepressants haven't been legitimately helpful for some, especially in the short term.
Right.
And neither does it mean that depression doesn't have biological contributors. There are other biological theories like the trauma we experience and the amount of chronic stress. Mm-hmm. And one that has a lot of research is that inflammation in our body, the same kind of thing that we get when we get physically sick with the flu, that shows up over and over with mental health conditions. Again, super good news, because guess what? You can impact in inflammation. I was about to say inflation.
Yeah, we don't have any control over inflation.
Inflation causes depression. No,
yes.
That also causes depression, unfortunately. Yes. we can impact inflammation by all the things that our mom used to tell us when we got sick. So this, by the way, this doesn't mean just choose to be happy. Just look at the sun. Don't worry, be happy. That's not helpful to anyone. What it means is you have power to make choices in other areas of your life. And if you start to make adjustments, say you start to just get more sunlight, that's the only thing you can do. You just start to move your body around more. You start to listen to less of the despairing, angry news cycle, right? Then all of a sudden you kind of, move in the right direction. That's the message. And I hear from people all the time that are like, wow, I've never heard that before. And that feels really hopeful.
Yeah. So you worked with some folks and you developed an app called Lift that I signed on to a couple days ago. I don't know that I deal necessarily with depression or anxiety or, but I thought it's got to be these tools that work for everybody, right? So when we talk about things like sleep and diet and gut-brain health and mindfulness, stillness, that's something that you talk a lot about, is sometimes just stillness. That is something that doesn't exist anywhere in my life. If there's a quiet moment, I'm going to fill it with something that streams from something. And so I have this little app now that reminds me to sometimes work on that stillness and mindfulness.
And what's the name of that app again?
It's Lyft.
Lyft. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll throw it up on the podcast, so you can find it.
10 years ago, someone remarked that the one place that people used to find a moment of stillness was when they went to the bathroom. And now, not even in the bathroom, because people just have, like, their minds are still
Well, that's when you catch up on podcasts, or that's when you catch up on email.
There are beautiful treatment facilities and clinics you can go to that will help you make adjustments in your life, right? And I'm telling you, they have 80-90% success rates, including with people who have not found any relief in their symptoms. But we'll never have enough professionals and facilities to reach the scope of the mental health problem. So our belief is that people in their own homes can do a lot if they have a little support. So what this app does is you can take a little survey and look at your own vulnerabilities, just a very basic survey. And then there are different journeys. You can kind of say, okay, I'm going to focus just on stress, or I'm going to focus on nutrition, or I have trauma in my past. I'm going to start to work through it. And you just start to move along. And then every week you say, how did I do with physical activity and nutrition, etc.? And you watch as your symptoms of depression, anxiety move and change. And so that's what the app is. The idea is there's so much we can do in our own homes. I know you've got a big focus on kids, for our children and for ourselves. My belief is that we can create sanctuary in our own homes that can help us heal. Yes, if the world is crazy around us, if it's really angry, our homes don't have to be angry. If there's a lot of anxiety about the state of the world, allow our homes to be a neutralizing space, right? Mm-hmm. If there's a lot of despair, let's teach our kids, and let's remind ourselves that we don't have to be despairing. We don't. If everybody despairs, then who's going to remind people not to despair? So I think it kind of comes back to, the world's going to do what the world does. What are we going to do in our own spaces?
Well, and from a public policy perspective, there's always this effort to create more programs, throw more human resources, more money at things that maybe are just not really targeting the things that really work. And I think do our kids we have a junior high in my neighborhood that literally has no classroom windows. And for junior high, if you don't have a PE class, are you getting any sunlight, in an 8-hour day? And then compounded with corn dogs and French fries for lunch, and the chaos of. So I wonder if when the policymakers say, okay, what these kids need are more psychologists walking the hallways to try to monitor affect to see who's maybe struggling, but we're not doing some of the simpler things that really have been shown to make, the little things that make big, have big returns. What should we be thinking about with our children?
Well, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the story of a parent who, rightfully so, is really worried about a child who's anxious or depressed or even suicidal. And they will take them to some professional and then really seize on the idea that they just have this brain issue, and as long as they take their meds, they're going to be okay, right?
Yeah.
So I need to say something about that because I've studied it a lot. So these medications have been studied in the short term, especially for adults. That's how the FDA approved them. We are using them in a long-term manner. That's just the fact. The New York Times did a long investigation a couple of years ago. There's more and more people that are taking them 5, 10 years. Consistently, all 22 studies I've found that look at long-term outcomes on antidepressants show that people are worse off long-term than those who never go on. So this is one of the things that we need to know if we're going to make wise public policy decisions.
Right.
Getting more people into treatment may not actually be like a big turnaround if we don't think more critically about what that treatment looks like. Second thing is, especially for teenagers, there is a doubling of the risk of suicidality with antidepressants among teenagers. And this sounds crazy to people, right? Like I told a religious leader this, and they're like, but they're called antidepressants.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
And my response to that is, well, this sounds crazy, but it's on the package. Like that's why there's a black box warning that actually says this. But we forget it. And I think we really like the idea, back to the parents, that this thing is going to take the problem away, right? So I just think we need to be more attentive that the best way to prevent suicide with a teenager who is on antidepressants is just to be attentive to any changes, any uncharacteristic changes when dosages are switched. If people think, oh no, these are safe and effective and not a problem, they're not going to be watching for that. So at least if we're paying attention. So what's the alternative? The alternative is saying, my child's struggles say something about their life, right? Instead of just asking people what's wrong with you, let's ask what has happened to you. And teenagers are grown up in a crazy world.
Yeah.
It's not just violent pornography, right? There's a lot of different difficult things going on, from bullying to this and that. So if we saw depression or anxiety or suicidality as a sign, as a signal, like you put your hand on the stove and you're like, that pain is telling me something, then we could make adjustments in our home based on what we see our children need. And when I see families do this, amazing things happen. Like, I worked with a teenager who was so depressed, and I visited with him in his home, and we looked at all the different things that could be contributing, right? And he's like, I'm not going to change my diet, but I'll get more sunlight. And he and his dad went out every day and played basketball together. And then I came back 2 weeks later, and he was feeling a little better. And so he said, okay, I'll try some changes in my diet. And I said, eat whatever you want this week, and I just want you to notice 3 foods that make you feel better and 3 foods that make you feel worse. That's all. And I came back 2 weeks later, and he was mad at me because he had learned that the potato chips, the Doritos that are bright orange, like in bright purple, like they look like fluorescent.
Yeah.
They just tanked his mood. And he discovered it. And so he just made some adjustments. A year later, he's just totally normal, totally fine, slight vulnerability to emotional struggles. That's the path we could be putting our kids on.
Yeah.
But a lot of parents are just saying, okay, let's stay on the meds and you'll be okay. That's not a great path.
Right.
It's just not. The long-term trajectory is not, it's going to be difficult if we don't think more about this.
And what do they, what is the long-term result for them as they become adults and become parents?
Well, I mean, all drugs function in a similar way. After a while, you have to take more of it in order to get the same effect. That's not just true of illegal drugs, it's true of all drugs. It's just like you have to increase the dosage. And then after a while, you have to switch to something else. And then in a while, you have to add something else, right? So after so many years of antidepressants, sometimes depression can convert to bipolar disorder.
Oh, wow.
Because of the treatment. People just think, oh, now I have a new diagnosis, but like it can kind of become what they call a prescription cascade. One of my foster daughters was on 10 different psychotropic, 10 different prescribed drugs. And I had a sit down with her doctor, like, hey,
wow,
let's talk. Because it was like, okay, depression, we've got the antidepressant. Anxiety, we've got the anxiety. She's having attention problems, we've got the ADHD drugs.
Yeah.
Sleep problem. And then it starts to cycle, right?
Yeah.
That's not good. And we have done no studies that look at that sort of a cocktail, especially with teenagers. So it's the vulnerable, it's the foster kids, it's the seniors in care centers who tend to have that happen most because people aren't paying attention to them.
Yeah.
But if we're paying attention, we can do better. And by the way, this isn't an anti-doctor or an anti-drug message. There can be an important place for medical care and support and wise physicians that can be selective and careful can be an important part of this. But too often we're doing the same thing we did with opioids. We're just like, well, this is what the companies told us and they'll be fine.
Right.
And, we got to think twice.
Well, and I like the point that you made about, for instance, this young man, right? And he looked at his life and he slowly made changes and he learned a skill through that process that will benefit him through his entire life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
in many aspects of his life.
That's self-reliance that he has,
Yep.
that he can choose his path forward. And so, using the Lyft.
I'm going to check it out. I am going to download it. Yeah.
Kind of make these small changes. I didn't mention at the top of the program that you do have your PhD in clinical community psychology, and so that really how you look at the whole community and that individual in the community is just fascinating work that you're doing, and I'm grateful to have found you.
Yes,
and
I so appreciate this perspective.
Yeah, and I'm a follower now, and it does make me think a lot about the public policy perspective. I served on the Utah Legislature's Health and Human Services Committee. I served on the Education Committee, where a lot of things sound band-aided, and people I think in our society want to find the easy fix and the quick fix. And I think we know intuitively that really doesn't work, but we're being told there are easy quick fixes. Take a pill.
And I will admit, I went into my doctor once and said, okay, I'm having this, I have quite good health, right? I'm having this health issue. I'm pretty sure it's that swig I'm drinking every day, but I don't want you to tell me it's the swig.
It's not. It is not the energy drink that I drink every day.
So I literally said, so if there's a pill you can give me so I can still drink my swig and deal with this. So he runs these tests. He comes back into the room. He says, Carolyn, it's the swig. Cut them out. I consequently do not drink soda anymore, and my health problems are gone. Well, but it is that
soda makes me happy.
In our
in my weekly diary for Dr. Hess, my happy days are the days that start with a bang or a Monster. And
I didn't say I don't drink energy drinks, but anyway.
But that's a great example of how professionals can reinforce and teach. Doctors don't just have to pass out pills. They can reinforce. And in fact, doctors are the best screeners for abuse because every woman sees a doctor. It's not the case that every woman will talk to other kind of officials, but the most vulnerable among us. And I've heard stories about kids who are abused going in to their doctor with depression and getting put on Prozac rather than somebody asking what's going on. And rape victims going to the doctor with anxiety and getting on the anxiety drug rather than the doctor saying, what's going on, right? And so paying attention and helping teach. We need a paradigm shift in mental health. And guess what? It's already here. We already know, as you said, this isn't quite doing what we had hoped. So let's shift.
Yeah.
Not like turning away from good things that have been helpful, but just open to receiving more, right? I just want to say one more thing to people who have tried everything and are still miserable and like despairing. I want you to know, I have heard stories from people who are the worst, most absolute, like the person in the mental hospital that is just out of control, suicidal. I've heard stories from many people who are now doing well, really well, right? And often it involves kind of a process of tapering off some things, making life changes, working through trauma, but you can do it. That's the message I wish we were giving not just kids, but adults. Like deeper healing is possible. I don't think we should predict that. I don't think we should say, you will get better, 30 days, your money back. I think we should leave it open. For complicated reasons, some people will hurt longer than others and have a more difficult journey. But we can all go on that journey, and it leads to good places. So I've been happy that Governor Cox has launched this sustainable outcome and healing initiative. I was on some of those calls, and I was so impressed with some of the efforts that are going in to precisely this. Let's make some fundamental changes. Let's rethink and let's look twice at what we're doing.
Okay, that's great to hear, because my concern is that too often government is as guilty of looking
more.
for the quick fix and the pill, and that's usually new programs and new money that may be just targeting the things that don't really work while disregarding the things that do. And so I think that's the tendency of government, to double down on what we've always done, just throw more money at it. So I'm happy to learn that there is that focus. And I was going to ask you if you're serving on any committee that might inform public initiative, but I am concerned that there is a big drive to put lots of psychologists walking hallways of schools when we've put them in caves and fed them corn dogs every day, and lots of other things, and gave them too much homework so they're not sleeping.
We need to have a follow-up conversation with Jacob. I would love to have a discussion about what's going on in the schools, what he's seeing, what changes he has seen, especially through COVID. I think that would make a great follow-up episode if that's something he would be open to in the future, because this has been fascinating, and I think a lot of people will be interested in this information that was shared. And tell us where we can find and follow you, Jacob.
Oh, yeah. I'm not one of those influencers. We have this new influencer class and the brand. You can notice, like, I'm in my boys' room, right? So, like, I write in the Desert News. I edit Public Square magazine. That's where most of my stuff comes up.
Great.
I do have a blog, but it's, Impact Suite is the tech company I work at. We've got apps for pornography addiction and depression, anxiety, chemical dependency. So there's a lot of support out there. And I just want to say one validating thing about what you said, Kim. We have seen these rates grow to historic proportion, right, over the last 20 years. The answer is not to do the same thing we've been doing more. It's that famous Einstein quote about insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I sometimes think that's what we're doing with mental health. We're like, well, we haven't seen a reduction in suicide. Let's just get more kids on these meds, and let's get more awareness and reduce more stigma. No, we've done this for 20 years.
Yeah.
We've got to come back to the drawing board and kind of simplify and look at some of these things. And I'm hearing a real willingness to that in our leadership. So any way I can support your work, be happy to talk again. I'll be writing more about this in the Deseret News and Public Square in the future. I've got something about suicide and antidepressants coming out next month. So
Okay.
And the
we'll
Lyft
be
app
watching.
is free, by the way. So
Okay.
yeah.
That's good to know.
yeah, and then there's like a premium version for a couple bucks, But yes, the Council for Sustainable Healing is also a nonprofit. We're relaunching that in about a month.
Okay.
And there will be lots of free resources there as well. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and appreciate your work and what you've shared with us. Thank you so much, Jacob.
Yeah, it's been delightful. Thank you.
For us as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think that gives us, all of us, a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a completely different perspective, but I'm, that example I had in my own life, which was simple and minimal compared to somebody who is suffering with depression or feeling suicidal. But truly, I did not want to make a change in my life, and I was just hoping that the doctor would give me a pill to make it for me, to make my choices okay. And I think I love this perspective. There are things we can take control over in our own lives.
And let's not. I mean, we have this opportunity in front of us to do the better things.
Yes.
And it's not just an opportunity. I mean, it's absolutely necessary that we
That's
do the
right.
right
It's
thing
fundamental. Yeah.
especially by our children, by us, and we all have friends, and at times we've dealt with different moods and that we've needed to get through or get through. So
And that bang may have gotten you through.
yeah, it just wakes me up in the morning.
So-
But I will tell you though, I need to put my hands back on this study. But the sleep study I read over 10 years
that's
ago
really interesting.
was absolutely eye-opening and frightening. So the children who lost half an hour of sleep, they were given words and memories, and the ones without the lack of sleep, only remembered the negative connotation
That's
words.
really awful.
And so we're training kids to just
My
have
two
the
oldest
bad
boys
memories.
would be up half the night, and I was okay with it when I was younger.
Well, that's what
Anyway,
weekends are
okay.
for. But you got to get back on track.
So that was awesome. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. Thank you, Fosmu.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm kind of feeling like I need some sunshine.
Yeah, we all do, although we've had plenty. But yes, we all do. And please listen to us, share, like us. You can find us anywhere you find your favorite podcast, Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble. See you next time.